From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
According to the information that we have, these mass hangings were taking place between 2011 and 2015, and up to 13,000 men would have been hanged, according to the information that we have.
As President Trump attempts to block all Syrians from entering the United States, a shocking new report by Amnesty International accuses the Assad government of running a human slaughterhouse and engaging in a deliberate policy of extermination by hanging thousands of civilians at a prison near Damascus. Then Trump lashes out again at the judges hearing challenges to his Muslim travel ban.
And I want to tell you, I listened to a bunch of stuff last night on television that was disgraceful. It was disgraceful.
We'll speak to ACLU attorney Hina Shamsi, who was recently questioned by border agents about her Pakistani citizenship and her work with the American Civil Liberties Union. She said the agent asked her why a person working for an organization with American in its name would have a Pakistani passport. And as Jeff Sessions is confirmed as Attorney General, we look at how Republicans silenced Senator Elizabeth Warren for reading a letter Coretta Scott King had submitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee 30 years ago, opposing Sessions for a federal judgeship.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
Mr. President, I am surprised that the words of Coretta Scott King are not suitable for debate in the United States Senate.
We'll hear Elizabeth Warren in her own words and speak to Barbara Reynolds, who wrote Coretta Scott King's memoir, My Life, My Love, My Legacy. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Senate has confirmed Jeff Sessions as Attorney General after a 52-47 vote Wednesday evening. Sessions' confirmation has faced widespread protest over his opposition to the Voting Rights Act and his history of making racist comments. The vote capped a contentious 24 hours. On Tuesday night, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was silenced and rebuked by the Senate for reading a 1986 letter written by Coretta Scott King denouncing Sessions, who was at the time being considered for a federal judgeship. The letter reads in part, quote, "The irony of Mr. Sessions' nomination is that if confirmed, he'll be given a life tenure for doing with a federal prosecution what the local sheriffs accomplished 20 years ago with clubs and cattle prods," unquote. Following Senator Warren's silencing, a number of Democratic senators urged their colleagues to vote against Sessions by reading the same letter. Senator Warren's reading marks the first time Coretta Scott King's testimony was included in the congressional record, even though King had submitted it 30 years ago. At the time, the Senate Judiciary Chair, Strom Thurmond, a fierce segregationist, did not enter King's testimony into the record. We'll have more on Sessions' confirmation, as well as the rebuke of Senator Warren after headlines. President Trump lashed out at the appeals court judges who are presiding over the lawsuit challenging his executive order banning people from 7 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States.
If you were a good student in high school or a bad student in high school, you can understand this. And it's really incredible to me that we have a court case that's going on so long, and it couldn't have been written any more precisely. It's not like, oh, gee, we wish it were written better. It was written beautifully.
That's President Trump speaking in Washington, D.C. Wednesday to a conference of law enforcement officials. During his comments, he also called the deliberations disgraceful. Trump's attack comes after he went on a Twitter rant over the weekend against federal Judge James Robart, calling him a so-called judge after Robart issued a nationwide injunction halting Trump's Muslim ban. Trump's rant sparked widespread criticism, including from Trump's Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch, who called Trump's tweets disheartening and demoralizing during a meeting with Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal. This morning, Trump attacked Senator Blumenthal on Twitter, claiming he was misrepresenting Gorsuch's words, even though a spokesperson for Judge Gorsuch himself told CNN the judge had voiced concern about Trump's comments during the meeting. The mother of a young British woman killed by a mentally ill man in Australia in August has written a furious open letter to President Trump after her daughter's killing was included in the White House's list of 78 terrorist attacks. Rosie Iliff wrote, quote, "My daughter's death will not be used to further this insane persecution of innocent people," unquote. Her daughter, 21-year-old Mia Iliff Chung, was stabbed to death in a hostel in Queensland by a Frenchman who had a preliminary diagnosis of schizophrenia. After the attack, the media originally reported the attacker, Smail Ayad, may have been an Islamic extremist, but Australian police quickly ruled out terrorism in its investigation. Sandra Jackson, the mother of a second backpacker who was killed during the attack, has also criticized Donald Trump, tweeting, quote, @RealDonaldTrump, wake up this morning to see you've used my son murder to further your campaign of hate. How dare you? You are a disgrace," unquote. President Trump is facing increasing criticism for not including cases of massacres carried out by white supremacists in the White House's recently issued list of 78 terrorist attacks. Among the attacks not included was the recent massacre in Quebec City, Canada, where Trump-supporting white nationalists killed 6 worshippers at a mosque on January 29th. Also not included was the Charleston, South Carolina massacre, where 9 black worshippers were killed by white supremacist Dylann Roof in 2015. On Tuesday, Wisconsin Republican Congressman Sean Duffy tried to defend the exclusion of these massacres from the list during an interview with CNN's Allison Camerata.
Congressman, why isn't the president talking about the white terrorist who mowed down 6 Muslims who were praying at their mosque?
Yeah, I don't know. But I would just tell you there is a difference. Again, death and murder on both sides is wrong. But if you want to take the dozens of scenarios where ISIS-inspired attacks have taken innocents, and you give me one example of what's happening, I think that was in Canada,
How about
of America.
How about the Charleston church shooting?
Here's what
he was
you're
an extremist. He was a white extremist.
Yeah, he was, okay.
How about that? That doesn't matter?
No, it does matter. It does matter. Look at the good things that came from it. Nikki Haley took down the Confederate flag. That was great.
Congressman Duffy did not acknowledge during this interview that in his home state of Wisconsin, a white supremacist killed 6 people in 2012 during a massacre at a Sikh temple. Meanwhile, the White House is also considering officially designating more groups as foreign terrorist organizations, including the Muslim Brotherhood, one of the Middle East's oldest and most influential Islamic groups. Protesters rallied at demonstrations nationwide Wednesday to protest the Army Corps of Engineers' announcement it'll be green-lighting the construction of the contested $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline. The company behind the pipeline, Energy Transfer Partners, says it'll start work immediately upon being granted the final permit. Hundreds of people gathered outside the White House in Washington, D.C. to protest the project, which many fear could contaminate the Missouri River, which serves as a drinking source for over 10 million people. Crowds also gathered in Los Angeles, Manhattan, Denver, and San Francisco, where about a dozen people were arrested blockading the doors of the federal building. More protesters rallied in Ithaca, New York, Columbus, Ohio, and in Chicago, where 4 people were arrested after locking themselves to each other to shut down a city bank to protest its investments in the Dakota Access Pipeline. Many of the protesters were furious not only about the government's approval of the pipeline, but also about Trump's recent claims that no one had called the White House to express opposition to the project.
As you know, I approved 2 pipelines that were stuck in limbo forever. I don't even think it was controversial. You know, I approved them. I haven't had one call from anybody saying, oh, that was a terrible thing you did. I haven't had one call.
As multiple news outlets have reported, the White House shut down its public comments phone line following Trump's inauguration. However, hundreds of thousands of people have written statements denouncing the project since the Army Corps of Engineers opened up the public comment period in late January. On Wednesday, a group of veterans and indigenous water protectors delivered electronic versions of more than 200,000 of these comments to the Army Corps office in Manhattan. Meanwhile, the City Council of Davis, California, has voted to unanimously divest $124 million in city banking services from Wells Fargo over concerns about the bank's backing of the pipeline. In Phoenix, Arizona, at least 6 protesters were arrested last night blockading an Immigrations and Customs Enforcement van in efforts to stop the deportation of 35-year-old Guadalupe Garcia de Reyes, a woman and mother who has been living in the United States for the last 21 years. Reyes was arrested and detained Wednesday by immigration agents during one of her routine required check-ins with immigration officials. Advocates say her arrest signals a clear shift toward the ramping up of deportations under the Trump administration, even of people like Reyes, who've been deemed a low priority for deportation under President Obama. Reyes' lawyer said, quote, "We're living in a new era now, an era of war on immigrants," unquote. In protest, hundreds of people surrounded the ICE van carrying Reyes. One man locked himself to the wheels of the van while others blockaded it with their bodies.
So we're here stopping the kidnapping of Lupita so that she can be with her family. I'm here because today it's Lupita, tomorrow it may be my mom, and the next day it might be your mom. We need to stop the deportations because there are 8 million people at risk. There are 8 million people who are priority in the Trump administration, in the Trump deportation machine. And he's not going to stop it. We have to stop it in your city, here in Phoenix, wherever you are. You can do this too.
President Trump is facing allegations of potential conflicts of interest after he attacked the department store Nordstrom in a tweet from his official government account, saying, quote, "My daughter Ivanka has been treated so unfairly by Nordstrom. She's a great person, always pushing me to do the right thing. Terrible!" exclamation point, unquote. The tweet came after Nordstrom announced it's dropping Ivanka's clothing line, a business decision the company says was based on performance. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer claims Nordstrom's decision was an attack on Trump's daughter. But multiple reporters have questioned how this is an attack on Ivanka, given she claims she'd stepped away from her clothing line after Trump's election. Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey has referred the tweet to the U.S. government, the U.S. Office of Government Ethics. Ivanka has no official government role, but she frequently sits in on top meetings with her father and her husband, Jared Kushner, a senior advisor in the White House. Meanwhile, in another potential conflict of interest, the Pentagon is looking to rent office space in Trump Tower in Manhattan, which means the government might end up funneling money directly to one of Trump's businesses. CNN reports that renting a floor in the tower costs about $1.5 million every year. In northern Afghanistan, 6 Red Cross workers were killed Wednesday after their cars were ambushed. 2 more are still missing. Taliban has denied involvement, and local officials have blamed the attack on ISIS. On Wednesday, ISIS claimed responsibility for a suicide bomb attack outside the Supreme Court building in Kabul Tuesday, which killed at least 22 people. In Romania, thousands of people braved the snow for a 9th straight day of anti-government and anti-corruption protests. The massive nightly mobilizations have been the largest in Romania since 1989. They were sparked by the passage of an emergency ordinance that decriminalized misconduct by officials, but have continued even after the government rescinded that decree. This is one of the protesters.
Keeping our position strong, and we want our government to resign because we cannot trust this government, because we caught him in the middle of the night passing laws for corrupt politicians. We cannot trust this government anymore. So the only thing that can satisfy us right now is the resignation of the Prime Minister and the government itself.
At least 3 players on the New England Patriots say they won't visit the White House for the traditional Super Bowl celebration as a protest against President Trump. Linebacker Donta Hightower and safety Devin McCourty have joined tight end Martellus Bennett in boycotting the presidential visit. McCourty said, quote, "I don't feel accepted in the White House. With the president having so many strong opinions and prejudices, I believe certain people might feel accepted there while others won't," unquote. The Patriots won the Super Bowl 34-28 Sunday night after a historic comeback over the Atlanta Falcons. And a Pennsylvania state senator has issued an unusually strong denouncement of President Trump, calling him a, quote, "fascist, loofah-faced blank Gibbon," unquote. Senator Dalen Leach's tweet was a response to Trump's threat that he would destroy the career of a Texas state senator who is proposing legislation to require police to obtain a conviction before seizing one's property in a process known as asset forfeiture. Currently, asset forfeiture allows police to seize people's property even if they're never even charged with a crime. After Trump's threat, Dalen tweeted, quote, "Hey, real Donald Trump, I oppose civil asset forfeiture, too. Why don't you try to destroy my career, you fascist, loofah-faced, bloop, Gibbon," unquote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Amnesty International has released a shocking report claiming as many as 13,000 people, mostly civilians, have been hanged in a Syrian government military prison in recent years. Amnesty accuses the Assad government of running a human slaughterhouse and engaging in a deliberate policy of extermination by hanging thousands of civilians at a prison near Damascus. Amnesty says the killings amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Earlier this week, Amnesty released a video describing how they uncovered the mass killings.
Since 2011, tens of thousands of people have disappeared into a vast network of prisons and detention centres run by the Syrian government. Many have been taken to Sidnaya, a notorious and terrifying prison where detainees are incarcerated in horrific conditions, systematically and brutally tortured. Thousands have died in confinement. Inaccessible to journalists and independent monitoring groups, the prison is a black hole of which no recent images exist. The memories of those who survive it are the only available resource with which to understand what happens within Sidnaya. In April 2016, Amnesty International and Forensic Architecture travelled to Turkey to meet a group of Sidnaya survivors. We used architectural and acoustic modelling to reconstruct the prison and their experiences of detention. Because the prisoners were held in darkness and under a brutally enforced silence, their memories depend on an acute experience of sound. Footsteps, doors opening and locking, water dripping in the pipes. All of these sounds structure detainees' experiences of space and time and forebode what was to come. Based on these testimonies, we have constructed a model of the entire prison and located the witness testimonies and the sounds they recall within it. These testimonies are traumatic recollections and are rarely straightforward descriptions of events. In Sidnaya, the architecture of the prison emerges not only as a location of torture, but itself as an instrument in its perpetration.
The Syrian Justice Ministry has rejected Amnesty International's finding, issuing a statement saying, quote, "The Justice Ministry denies and condemns in the strongest terms what was reported because it is not based on correct evidence but on personal emotions that aim to achieve well-known political goals." Amnesty's report, titled Human Slaughterhouse, was published on Tuesday, less than 2 weeks after President Trump signed an executive order banning refugees indefinitely and temporarily barring entry to all citizens from Syria and 6 other Muslim-majority nations. It also comes as Fox News is reporting Russia has just sent Syria the largest shipment of missiles between the two countries to date.
We go now to London, where we're joined by Nicolette Waldman, an Amnesty International researcher specializing in detention issues. She's the co-author of Amnesty's new report. The title is chilling, the information inside even more so. Human Slaughterhouse. Nicolette, tell us what you found.
Over the course of a year of research, we found that the Syrian authorities are carrying out a calculated campaign of mass hangings and extermination at Sidnaya prison. Every week, and often twice a week, prisoners are taken out of their cells and brought to another prison, another building on the grounds of the prison, where they're hanged to death. And since 2011, as many as 13,000 people have been hanged. As the backdrop to this, detainees are held in horrific conditions, and the Syrian authorities have been deliberately inflicting repeated torture as well as the systematic deprivation of food, water, medicine, and medical care, which has caused a massive number of deaths.
And Nicolette, can you give us a sense of how many people are detained in Sednaya and how many similar prisons there are across Syria?
What we've been told is that between 10,000 and 20,000 detainees are held in Sednaya at any given time. But I want to point out that it's very difficult to know exactly how many, because the government releases no evidence, no information on the whereabouts of the people that they arrest. And in fact, almost every detainee arrested by the Syrian authorities is disappeared, meaning that they're cut off from their friends, their families, and the outside world. In terms of the other detention facilities in Syria, there's a vast network of centers that we know about and centers that we do not know about. So this is a very large system that has processed tens of thousands of people since 2011 in particular. And since that time, as many as 17,700 people have died as a result of these extermination policies, which is the result of repeated torture and terrible conditions. So the 17,700 deaths is even in addition to these as many as 13,000 people who have been hanged at Sednaya prison.
I want to turn to a short animated video produced by Amnesty International. The script is extrapolated from the experiences of prisoners interviewed by Amnesty.
Why aren't we leaving? Why are we being taken to solitary cells? It's so cramped. It's okay. Soon we will be in a better place. I can't take these new beatings. It has never been so bad. Are we really being transferred? Or is this our last punishment? We are on the move. We stopped. Why? We're in another building. They grabbed my finger. They're taking my fingerprints. What? I can't believe it. They tell me I've been condemned to death and ask if I have any last wish. I've done nothing wrong. They said I was being transferred. I'm supposed to be transferred. Dear God, protect my family.
The animation ends with the hanging of the man. That video ends with the words, as many as 13,000 people have been executed in Sednaya since 2011. Our guest, Nicolette Waldman, co-author of the Amnesty report. Can you tell us, Nicolette, how you got this information, how you collected this information from prisoners and also from guards?
What we did for this report is that we carried out the research over the course of 12 months, so from December 2015 to December 2016. And in that time, we interviewed 84 witnesses. These witnesses included former detainees who had witnessed different steps of the execution process. And we also identified former guards and officials at the prison. As well, we interviewed former judges and Syrian lawyers. And with all of the information we received, which was oftentimes collected after 2 or 3 or more interviews with each witness to evaluate the veracity and the consistency of what they were saying, we were able to corroborate, cross-check, and finally build up a step-by-step picture of what is happening at Sednaya. Now, most of these interviews were carried out in southern Turkey and in other areas in Turkey, as well as remotely with witnesses in Lebanon, Jordan, the U.S., and Europe. And we were forced to actually conduct this research outside of Syria because we have been barred from entering government-controlled areas since 2011. We've also been barred, along with almost every international monitoring group, from entering the prisons in Syria. So what's important to remember is that these are really black holes of war crimes and crimes against humanity, where crimes have been taking place on a widespread, systematic, and continual basis since 2011. And the main crimes against humanity that are being committed, again, these are crimes against humanity, some of the most serious international crimes that you could ever imagine. But just at Sednaya, the crimes against humanity that are being carried out since 2011 are murder, disappearance, torture, and extermination. So these are massive violations that we're really pushing the world to take notice of and to take action.
And Nicolette, as you mentioned, you also spoke to prison guards, former prison guards. Now, that prison was run by Syrian military personnel. How did you get them to speak to you, and what did they say about why they were working at this prison?
So to identify the guards, we ended up taking, again, a very long and arduous process of using local contacts, civil society organizations, our own contacts, basically a network of people to help us identify these people, because we felt that these findings were so significant and so weighty that we needed to have not only the witness testimony, but also people from the inside. And what they told us about why they conducted these crimes is really is not something that we talked about. Instead, we were trying to get the information. However, what is clear to me is that this is not a system that is carried out by one person or another. This is a top-down system where it's very much controlled through the highest levels of the Syrian government and the Syrian political establishment. And what we found about these policies of mass hangings and extermination is that they come from the very top, and that actually the very farcical death sentences that are issued to the prisoners are signed by the Minister of Defense, who is deputized to act for President Assad, and that the hangings themselves, which take place in the middle of the night and in total secrecy, are overseen by a panel of men, which include top-level security force officers, as well as top officials from the prison, and as well from Tishreen Military Hospital, where the prisoners are taken by the truckload after they are hanged to be registered before they are taken on to mass graves.
Now, the Assad regime, as you've pointed out, does not talk about this prison. It's more or less concealed from view. But the Assad regime has, of course, been accused of some of the worst atrocities against its civilian population, and that occurs mostly in broad daylight. Now, you say what's going on in this prison is more sinister. And why is that?
It's absolutely sinister, and I think that's the exact right word to use, because not only are these hangings taking place, again, on a routine basis, weekly or twice a week, but the conditions in which these prisoners are held are just very difficult to comprehend, but we have to try. And basically what we've been told through very consistent testimony, I heard the same things again and again, is that prisoners are actually routinely beaten. They are also not allowed to make any sound. So even when they are tortured, they cannot make a sound, and they are punished if they do with further beatings. They are also forced to pick somebody in the cell who then must dole out the punishment or the torture each day. And they're also, what we've been told, forced to rape each other. The prisoners, especially the older prisoners, will be forced to rape sometimes the younger prisoners. And what we were told by one witness is that after these rapes, the men are so traumatized that they even stop eating, and they just can't carry on. But in these very sadistic and just horrible rules, the prisoners are also being subjected to the systematic deprivation of food, water, medicine, and medical care. So they're dying horrific deaths of thirst, of hunger, of diseases and then treatable infections. All of what they're going through is treatable. And this is why we're calling this the crime against humanity of extermination, which is a particular crime in the Rome Statute, which refers to when a state actually inflicts conditions on a certain sector of a population and with the intent of destroying that population. And what we found is that the Syrian authorities aim to destroy the people that they have in their custody. And finally, I want to point out that these people, the vast majority of them are civilians. Some of their most common profiles are long-term political dissidents, they're human rights defenders, they're journalists, they're humanitarian aid activists, and sometimes they have just people who went to 1 or 2 protests. So these are people who went out and basically spoke and demanded a freer and fairer society in Syria, and for that, they're paying the ultimate price.
Nicolette Waldman, I want to end by asking you about what, well, the president himself here in the United States, President Trump, has called the Muslim ban. Connecticut Democratic Senator Chris Murphy tweeted, "We bomb your country, creating a humanitarian nightmare, then lock you inside. That's a horror movie, not a foreign policy." He was talking about Syria. You're American. We're speaking to you in London. Can you talk about the ban on Muslims, on all Syrians right now? At least if Trump had his way. Judges are interfering with that plan.
This ban against Syrian refugees, I think, has to be understood in the context of what Syrians are going through. They are going through systematic starvation sieges. They are being bombed in their homes, in their schools, in illegal attacks on civilians and civilian targets such as hospitals, which are rampant. And in the jails in Syria, civilians are being systematically targeted, civilians who just show any sign of dissent. And this is a systematic policy that has happened since 2011. This is widespread, and this is a calculated policy by the Syrian authorities. And I want to be very clear that while we at Amnesty have documented abuses on every side, and actually it also helps create the picture of how much civilians are suffering in Syria. But in the context of detention in particular, the Syrian authorities are carrying out the vast majority of violations. So if you think about a population that has been terrorized, they've been arrested, disappeared, tortured, and killed on the scale of tens of thousands of people, and all of those people have family members. It does make sense to me that you might want to flee your country in that kind of circumstance. And many people don't want to go. They end up going because they feel they have to. They're running for their lives. And then to have that answered with a strict ban, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And at Amnesty, we are very concerned about this ban for people who are refugees deserving of protection, not of being blocked and sent back into circumstances where they and their families can be treated in this just monstrous way.
Nicolette Waldman, we want to thank you for being with us. Amnesty International researcher specializing in detention issues. She's co-author of the new Amnesty report, Human Slaughterhouse, Mass Hangings and Extermination at Zagnaya Prison, Syria. We'll link to that report at DemocracyNow.org. When we come back, we'll speak with an ACLU lawyer and talk with her about what it meant to come into this country, as she's done so many times, traveling back and forth, speaking to people around the world, and being stopped. She didn't have a U.S. passport, and asked how she worked for an organization, the ACLU, that has the word American in it. Stay with you. Stay with us.
قطعوا صلاتي واحد حبيب الروح يمي واحد حياتي واحد حياتي ودعوا صوب حمص العادي صوب حمص العادي وقالوا شو هم هنموت يمي تبقى القاضي تبقى القاضي يا ريت عيني نهر يمي شربن منه
The Road to Aitit by Youssef Kakia. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is expected to rule as early as today on President Trump's temporary travel ban on refugees and people from 7 Muslim-majority countries. On Tuesday, a 3-judge panel heard arguments from lawyers representing the Justice Department and the state of Washington, which sued Trump over the order. On Wednesday morning, Trump accused the judges of being, quote, so political, and described the legal process as disgraceful.
And I want to tell you, I listened to a bunch of stuff last night on television that was disgraceful. It was disgraceful. So I think it's sad. I think it's a sad day. I think our security is at risk today, and it will be at risk until such time as we are entitled and get what we are entitled to as citizens of this country, as chiefs, as sheriffs of this country.
To talk more about the executive order, we're joined by Hina Shamsi. In addition to being the director of the American Civil Liberties Union's National Security Project, she's also been personally impacted by Trump's executive order. Although she's a legal permanent resident, Hina was stopped and questioned about her Pakistani citizenship and her work with the ACLU when she flew back into the country last week. So, Hina, let's start there. What happened to you? Where did you fly in? What were you asked?
Well, Amy, I was in the island nation of Dominica for client meetings and depositions in our lawsuit on behalf of torture victims seeking accountability from the 2 CIA contractors who are behind the torture program there. And I was
Mitchell and Jessen.
Mitchell and Jessen, yes, Doctors Mitchell and Jessen. And I was coming back from that set of meetings and the deposition and transiting through San Juan, Puerto Rico. When I was going through immigration, it seemed like an immediate flag went up, and I was pulled into what's called secondary screening by a Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, agent. Now, I want to emphasize something, which is that, you know, what happened to me is nothing compared to the suffering and hardship that people impacted by the executive order Muslim ban are going through and have gone through. To me, this was, though, and I usually don't write about things that are so personal, but it said something to me about the climate in these times, and the kinds of questions that were raised were ones that I have never experienced in over 25 years of travel into and out of this country, over 10 years of work for the ACLU and other rights groups and travel in that context.
You went to college here?
I came here to go to college.
Where did you go?
Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. You know, worked here, law school, all of that. And never have I experienced anything like this, because it started out with something absolutely legitimate, which is, you know, where were you and what were you doing? But then as soon as I said that I work for the American Civil Liberties Union and I was traveling for work, there was an entire series of questions that began with, why would someone working for an organization or this organization with American in its name have this passport? And the agent had my Pakistani passport in his hand. Or why would someone working for an organization with American in its name be representing people who are not citizens? And when I was explaining that my work is, and long has been, as a U.S.-trained lawyer, sworn to uphold the U.S. Constitution, which is what I work to do at the ACLU, one response was, well, if you're working for an organization with American in its name and your focus is the U.S. Constitution, why are you traveling abroad so much? And so over and over again, I tried to explain my work, my focus on U.S. Constitution and treaties, and the fact that I was traveling for this work. And amongst the responses were, when you're at meetings and talks abroad, do you talk about US law or do you talk about the laws of other countries? Now, none of this is remotely relevant to what might be the legitimate question that CBP can ask, which is, what were you doing and what's your status and can you legitimately come into the United States? And it really was a tenor of suspicion, of emphasis on American and what constitutes American in a way that I hadn't seen before.
And you were taken to secondary screening, as you said. Now, there were a very large number of people who were subjected to secondary screening from Pakistan and from other countries right after 9/11. But you say this has never happened to you. But in your view, how does what's happening now compare to what happened immediately following 9/11, and which went on for some time for people who were, like you, legal permanent residents of the U.S. but had passports from Muslim-majority countries?
Right, and indeed, immediately after 9/11, there was a whole series of questioning for people with, legal permanent residence of with Pakistani nationality and nationality of other majority Muslim countries as well. And I've certainly represented people who have been unjustifiably questioned based on their work or their, citizenship or their studies. And perhaps it's remarkable that I've not been questioned before. I sometimes think that. But it is also true that in all my years of travel, when I was challenging Bush administration policies of torture and Guantanamo and other human rights abuses, or travel during the Obama administration when I've been challenging unlawful targeted killing, anti-Muslim discrimination, illegal spying, people hadn't questioned me about in this manner, which seemed to sort of convey a questioning of identity and even a sense of loyalty here. That just hadn't happened before. And so, it's hard to generalize, and I'm reluctant to do that based on my single experience. But we've certainly heard of other people, citizens and LPRs of Pakistan and other majority Muslim countries being questioned even recently. And so I worry deeply about the message that has been sent from the top, this anti-Muslim animus, and the ways that it is being heard by government officials and government agents who are able to exercise this power at the border and other places.
Let me ask you, if they asked you to give up your social media passwords or anything like that.
They did not. They did not ask me that, although they've been asking, there's concern that they've been asking other people that recently.
Because CNET's reporting visitors to the U.S. might be asked to relinquish their social media passwords to border agents as part of an attempt to tighten security checks. Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly was being questioned by the Homeland Security Committee on Tuesday. And he said, we want to get on their social media with passwords. What do you do? What do you say? They asked him. He responded, if they don't want to cooperate, then you don't come in. What are your rights, both as American citizens, as permanent residents like you, and as people with visas who are coming into this country?
So this is a hotly contested area right now, and it is, well, first of all, as a citizen, there's a right to re-enter the country. As a legal permanent resident, you can get questioned, and we generally advise people to answer questions and to know that if they're not responding to questions or refusing to provide information, that they might face delays. But this is a situation in which people can be very vulnerable and feel very vulnerable at the border. And when there were proposals during the Obama administration to ask people for their social media handles and their passwords and so on, we and other organizations wrote in comment to criticize and question these proposals. How specifically are you going to implement this? For what purpose? Are you going to retain this information? What are you actually going to do about it? And we've not really received any satisfactory responses yet. And so this is something that we are watching very, very closely indeed.
And do you know if there are human rights lawyers or organizations who have already issued this inquiry to the Trump administration? Since there are reports it's already happening.
Yes, and I think people are questioning and asking what's going on and what are you planning on doing, questions that we've had previously and that are even more acute now.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask about another issue, which is that the Trump administration is now reportedly discussing an order, another executive order, to designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. Some of Trump's advisors have long viewed the Muslim Brotherhood as a radical faction coming into the United States to promote Sharia law. Among its most vocal critics has been Breitbart News, which was previously headed by Steve Bannon, now Trump's chief White House strategist. Frank Gaffney of the Center for Security Policy spoke to Breitbart News last week, urging Trump to designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization.
I hope he'll do it, and I hope he'll do it soon. The reason simply being that the Muslim Brotherhood, in many ways, is the leading edge of the global jihad movement worldwide. And I'm very heartened that the president has seemingly taken stock of this outfit, recognizes that they are a Sharia supremacist program that, in fact, has provided sort of the ideological impetus behind all of the other jihadist enterprises around the world.
So, Hina Shamsi, can you comment on that? What are the implications if this actually goes through and the Muslim Brotherhood is designated as a terrorist organization, and also the plans to designate Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps as a terrorist organization?
You know, Nermeen, I think it's important to understand that what were fringe anti-Muslim extremist views that have existed for a long time now are now in the White House. And this has long been an endeavor of those with these fringe anti-Muslim extremist views, where they've sought designation of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an entity that was founded in 1928 in Egypt, has effectively independent chapters that are political parties in different places. It's a complicated thing. But they've sought designation in order then to target American Muslim civil society and its leaders with spurious guilt by association, facts that quite simply do not exist in terms of alleged wrongdoing. And I think the real concern here is, with respect to what's going to happen domestically, is that this move may then open the door for the use of dangerous and overbroad material support investigation or prosecution, and the use of overbroad, vague, and unfair terrorism designation or investigation schemes that are so broad, as I said, that they can sweep in innocents, individuals and organizations, and place them at risk of having their assets frozen, even while they're under suspicion and investigation. And really one of the worst stigmas that exists in our society today, which is suspected terrorist.
But how would the Trump administration make a link between the Muslim Brotherhood and American Muslims? Because it's not obvious that there's any connection at all. I mean, as you pointed out, it was founded in Egypt in the early 20th century. What's the connection? Why would the Muslim Brotherhood in particular produce greater suspicion of American Muslims than the thousands of other things that already do?
It's an excellent question, and it relates to a series of documents or allegations, one in particular, that go back to 1991, that have been discredited with respect to allegations of connections between the Muslim Brotherhood and U.S. Muslim people or organizations, at a time when there was nothing wrong with any of this, right? And so when you actually look at the facts, there's nothing there. But that doesn't stop these extreme conspiracy theories. Now, they've advanced these theories, for a while now, during the Bush administration and the Obama administration, and both administrations rejected these approaches based on bigotry and guilt by spurious association again. But I think there's real concern that this administration is poised to act on it.
Finally, we just have 30 seconds, but on the issue of the judges deliberating on the Muslim ban and Trump going on his rant against the judges once again, calling the former judge that ruled originally a so-called judge, and now talking about these deliberations as disgraceful.
What's truly disgraceful and dangerous is these attacks on one of the pillars of our democracy, the judicial branch, which is necessary to serve as a check on executive abuses, and that is what's at stake.
Hina Shamsi, we want to thank you very much for being with us, Director of the American Civil Liberties Union's National Security Project. She published an article this week. We'll link to it. Flying home from abroad, a border agent stopped and questioned me about my work for the ACLU. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, what happened yesterday on the floor of the Senate when Senator Elizabeth Warren was silenced for reading the words of Coretta Scott King that she wrote to the Senate Judiciary Committee 30 years ago, opposing Jeff Sessions at the time to be a federal judge. Stay with us. Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, that version by Lydia Violet here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
The Senate has confirmed Jeff Sessions as the United States Attorney General after a 52 to 47 vote Wednesday evening. Sessions' confirmation has faced widespread protests over his opposition to the Voting Rights Act and his history of making racist comments. The vote capped a contentious 24 hours. On Tuesday night, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was silenced and rebuked by the Senate for reading a 1986 letter written by Coretta Scott King denouncing Sessions, who was at the time being considered for a federal judgeship. Presiding officer, Montana Republican Senator Steve Daines, first interrupted Warren.
It has been a long uphill struggle to keep alive the vital legislation that protects the most fundamental right to vote. A person who has exhibited so much hostility to the enforcement of those laws.
The senator is reminded that it is a violation of Rule 19 of the standing rules of the Senate to impute to another senator or senators any conduct or motive unworthy or becoming a senator.
Mr. President, I don't think I quite understand. I'm reading a letter from Coretta Scott King to the Judiciary Committee from 1986 that was admitted into the record. I'm simply reading what she wrote.
That's Senator Elizabeth Warren. She was then allowed to continue reading the letter and speak further about her positions to Sessions, but after 20 minutes, Warren was again interrupted, this time by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
The senators impugn the motives and conduct of our colleague from Alabama as warned by the chair. Senator Warren, quote, said Senator Sessions has used the awesome power of his office to chill the free exercise of the vote by black citizens. I call the senator to order under the provisions of Rule 19.
Mr. President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I'm surprised that the words of Coretta Scott King are not suitable for debate in the United States Senate.
Senator McConnell went on to defend his decision to silence Elizabeth Warren.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
She persisted. Senator Warren was then prohibited from speaking for the remainder of the debate over Sessions' confirmation after the Senate passed a party-line rebuke against her. Following Warren's silencing, several male Democratic senators urged their colleagues to vote against Sessions by reading the same letter. They were not rebuked. In the letter, Coretta Scott King cites Sessions' attempted prosecution of 3 black civil rights workers in Marion, Alabama for voter fraud. We're joined now by Reverend Dr. Barbara Reynolds. She worked with Coretta Scott King on her memoir, Coretta Scott King, My Life, My Love, My Legacy. You know, interestingly, Reverend Dr. Barbara Reynolds, this may be the first time that Coretta Scott King's testimony against Sessions was actually put into the congressional record. She had sent it in 30 years ago, but at the time, the Judiciary Chair, Senate Judiciary Chair Strom Thurmond, a fierce segregationist, did not put her testimony into the record. So 30 years later, Senator Warren got it put in by reading it. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. But when you look at this spectacle of a female U.S. Senator trying to read a testimony of an American hero, Coretta Scott King, who was a witness to what happened in Alabama, what she stood up for, and both of them were silenced, it just made me feel that we were back to the 1950s. It was an appalling sight. But I want to say this about who she was, because she was not talking theoretically. I mean, she grew up in Marion, Alabama, where this whole case with the Marion 3 took place. These were civil rights leaders who were trying to register blacks to vote, and Sessions prosecuted them. Now, this is important because of who she is and why she should have been heard, because she knew what most of us do not know, because she lived it. When she was 15 years old, her home that she grew up in was burned to the ground. Her father had 2 businesses. One was a sawmill, and that was burned to the ground. But they had no vote. They had no voice, and they were considered nobodies that the police didn't have to protect. And this is what the civil rights movement that she was a co-partner in with Dr. Martin Luther King corrected that. And we come into the 80s. Now blacks had more voting power in places like Marion, Alabama. And she wanted people to know what had happened, because she represented thousands and thousands of people who could not vote, had no power to protect themselves. And so now we come to 1986, and she's reporting in her testimony of what was, the progress had been made, and how she never wanted America to go back to that. Why
Reverend
not
Dr. Barbara
that?
Reynolds, we're going to continue this conversation and post it online at DemocracyNow.org. The memoir is called Coretta Scott King. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Thanks so much for joining us.